Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Economic Immigration series. This is our second session in the series. If you missed the first one, you can certainly check that out on our ANC, Association for New Canadians, YouTube channel. And Meghan presented that one, and it's available there. You'll see it's session 1. So check that out if you missed it the last time. So we are happy to be here, as I say, with session number 2, Pathways to Permanent Residency in Canada, Tips and Tricks for Foreign Workers in Canada Registration. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen to just do a little introduction for anyone that may not be familiar with the ANC. So the Economic Immigration series, just to give people a little idea about that, was something that was started last year during COVID. And we had the idea of creating a series to help people, along with Meghan Felt from McInnes Cooper, who is an expert in the area of immigration law. We had the idea to create this series to help people understand the whole system of economic immigration. So that's how the series was born. The first one actually was attracting people to immigrants to the province during COVID. This session, Pathways to Permanent Residency in Canada, we also have Meghan with us. And again, it's sponsored with McInnes Cooper, a partnership for this series. First, I would like to start with our land acknowledgement. With deep respect and gratitude, we acknowledge that ANC offices are located on traditional Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit territories. As newcomers to Uktahumguk, Newfoundland, and Labrador, we commit to collective healing, true reconciliation, and land honoring. And a little bit about the ANC. It's very important for us with the land acknowledgement and with a lot of the programs that we do to make sure that this is an inclusive space where people feel that they can be heard and ask their questions. I'm actually the coordinator of the Diversity and Public Education team. I don't know if I said that in the beginning. And our team is here to help businesses, community organizations, and the public, anyone at all really, with diversity, inclusion, anti-racism training. So we take it very seriously to have the land acknowledgement and to make sure that everyone feels like they're a part of the discussion. The Association for New Canadians is a nonprofit organization. We have a team of over about 100 staff. We have offices across the province. I'm based here in Corner Brook. We have people in St. John's, Grand Falls, Windsor, Lab City, Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Bordeaux, Clarenville, and St. Anthony. So we really are a pan-provincial organization. Some of the programs that we offer: resettlement and settlement services. That's our settlement planning, helping with integrating into the communities. We have a language training center. We have ESL classes. We offer career and employment services. That's through our Access division, where we help people get ready for the workplace. As I said, I'm part of the Diversity and Public Education team. We also have child and youth programs with our CAPE division, and we also have volunteer and community connections. So these services are available. You can check out the website if you want any more information, or you can always reach out to me at diversity@ancnl.ca, and I can give you more information on anything that you need. And now to get on to Meghan, who is our star for today. Meghan is an immigration lawyer with McInnes Cooper. She's got a wealth of experience in this field. She is the current chair of the Canadian Bar Association NL Citizenship and Immigration section. She contributes to the developments of immigration law. She also has quite an extensive writing portfolio in this area of offering knowledge pieces on immigration legislation and policy. So we are so happy to have Meghan back with us today to present this material to you. What we'll do is we'll switch over and have Meghan share her screen now, and I'll step in and monitor the chat for questions, but we'll also have a question period at the end. And Meghan, if you want to take questions throughout, you can just let me know, and then I'll let you know if anything comes up.
Sure, no problem. Okay, excellent. So, hi everyone. It's really nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'll try to take questions. What I might do is I've left some time. We have about an hour and a half, so I'm hoping to leave a little bit of room, or a good chunk of room at the end for questions. But what I'll do is, if I'm kind of moving into another segment and I feel like there might be some questions, then to keep this maybe a little bit more of a conversational type of presentation, then I'll take questions throughout as well. So if something you think you want to hold off until the end, like it's something that's maybe a little bit more specific, then maybe you can do that. But if it's something that's related to one of the topics I'm talking about, then you can raise your hand and let Debbie or one of the others know. And when I stop my presentation briefly, then I'll take some questions. So thank you so much for that introduction, Debbie. I'm so happy to be here today. I have about 11 years of immigration, of practicing exclusively in the area of immigration as a lawyer. So I have quite a bit of experience. And what I find in terms of my general clientele, I help a lot of employers and I help a lot of individuals to obtain work permit authorizations and permanent residency in Canada. We do everything from LMIAs and like I said, work permits, citizenship, spousal sponsorships, refugee applications, H&C. We even do a little bit of immigration litigation, although we don't see as much of that here in Newfoundland as you might in larger centers like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. But we do practice we do have expertise in every different area of immigration, Canadian immigration. So I'll get started. We're going to get started on the pathways to permanent residency. So I'm going to focus my presentation today generally on immigration pathways for PR for individuals who are currently in Canada and already in Canada, but mostly people who would have jobs already in Canada or spouses that have jobs and are looking for options for permanent residency. As a general statement, generally speaking, in Canada, if you want to immigrate under one of the economic pathways for permanent residency, you need to have a job offer. There are very, very few exceptions. I'll talk about some of them here today. But with the general rule of thumb, I guess you can say is that you do need a job offer in Canada in order to be eligible for permanent residency under one of the economic immigration pathways. So before I get into the actual pathways, I'm going to do a little bit of Immigration 101 because you're going to see a lot of acronyms throughout this presentation, and I'm going to be referring to NOC codes and things like that. So it's important that you kind of have just a basic understanding of what some of these things are so that you don't get confused when I start talking about them and you start seeing acronyms flying all over the place. So just in terms of status in Canada, there are three different types of status. You have your temporary resident status, which includes, work permit holders, study permit holders, business visitors, and tourist visitors in Canada. And then you have your permanent resident, people who are permanent residents in Canada, which would include refugees, people who are, or government-sponsored refugees, or people who come over, either government-sponsored or privately sponsored refugees that come over as permanent residents in Canada. So they already have their permanent residence when they're here. And then the third group would be citizenship. So people who have either, who are either born Canadian or who have naturalized and become citizens through immigration. So those are the three general statuses that you should be aware of. In terms of some of the acronyms we'll talk about a little bit here today, some of the big one is IRCC, Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada. This is the governing body that, overarching body of government that controls and processes immigration applications in Canada. They're the ones that process, your overseas work permit applications, or your inland work permit applications, or your permanent residency applications, your citizenship applications. ESDC, I'll speak to a little bit. Employment Social Development Canada. This is the agency that runs the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, which is the program that issues LMIAs, labor market impact assessments, to employers when they want to hire a foreign worker. So we'll speak a little bit about that throughout the presentation. And then also, of course, there's the CBSA, Canada Border Services Agency. And as I'm sure you are aware, these are the border agents that govern Canada's borders, and they have authority to be able to issue documents at the border, which include work permits and study permits, and they also govern enforcement proceedings at the border as well. So some other key definitions we'll talk about are, I'm going to speak to at the very end some tips and tricks as well, just things that that might help you if you're considering applying for permanent residency, or that you will or want to apply for permanent residency in the future, but you don't quite qualify yet. So there'll be some things that I speak to at the end. I thought it was most appropriate to speak to the tips and tricks at the end because you'll already have kind of a general understanding of how the programs work instead of going at those first. But you'll notice that, again, throughout the presentation, as well as in my tips and tricks section, there will be, you'll see some of these acronyms coming up quite frequently. So the first one is ECA, Education Credential Assessment. This is a document that's required for almost, not every different permanent residency application, but almost all of them, the economic ones. And basically, it's a document that you get from an agency that is a certificate, basically, that indicates what the Canadian equivalent would be for the education that you have, the foreign education that you have. So immigration have designated a number of different agencies that are acceptable for immigration purposes for Canada. And so if you want to get an ECA, you have to go to one of these agencies and you have to send them your diplomas and transcripts, and they'll evaluate them and then issue you a certificate. And the certificate you will use, in addition to your education transcripts and diplomas, you'll use that in your permanent residency application. So one of the ones I see most often is West World Education Services. Most of my clients, they're the most popular for some reason. So, if you're wondering what that is, that's an ECA, Education Credential Assessment Agency. The other thing we'll discuss a little bit is the Canadian Language Benchmark, CLB. So in Canada, if you're applying for permanent residency, almost all of the applications for permanent residency require that you write an English test and require that, or French test, I should say, and require that you perform to a minimum standard for that particular program. So in the English tests that are accepted by IRCC are the IELTS and the CELPIP. There are a couple of other French tests that are available as well. I don't typically file applications in French because I'm English speaking, so I'll speak to the English ones better than I can speak to the French ones. But you can find all the information on what language tests are acceptable for immigration purposes on the IRCC website. The ones that we use for English are IELTS and CELPIP. And the Canadian Language Benchmark, the CLB, is a benchmark that is just as it indicates, is a benchmark that the Canadian government have established. So it doesn't automatically correspond with your point score. So the CELPIP, which is a Canadian only test, if you get a 7 in reading on the CELPIP test, then that's a CLB 7 in reading. But for the IELTS, your test scores aren't indicative of the exact CLB, aren't exactly correspondent of each other. So if you have a 4 or a 7 on the IELTS test, that's not necessarily a CLB 7. There's actually a language test equivalency chart that you have to look at to see what your CLB benchmark is based on the IELTS score that you get. So if you write the IELTS, if you've written the IELTS, don't be confused and automatically think that if you get a 7 or on the IELTS, it's a CLB 7. A 7 on the IELTS is actually different. So it's important to be aware of that. And so that's something that I find that a lot of people get confused on. So if you go on the IRCC website, you can look up the language test equivalency chart and you can see what your CLB is based on what your score is, either in French or English, depending on which test you wrote. So that's you'll see that the CLB benchmark will come up quite frequently throughout my presentation. And then we have the National Occupation Classification. I have another slide on this one shortly after, but these are NOC codes for your permanent residency, your economic immigration permanent residency applications. The NOC code is going to be important. So basically, the Canadian government have given virtually every occupation in Canada a code, a NOC code. And again, you can find this on the Canadian government website. But the NOC code, basically, you can look up the NOC code, and then corresponding to that NOC code, you can look up the job duties, the main duties, the different types of classifications. You can even look up the prevailing wage in Canada for that NOC code. So all of these things are really important for immigration applications. So one of the first things when I meet with a client is I always look at, okay, well, not just what's your job title or your job description. Let's find the corresponding NOC code and make sure that it's the correct one. Because if you make mistakes in your choosing your NOC code, it can really have significant implications on your application in the future. So that's one of my tips and tricks that I'll speak to later a little bit as well. So in terms of NOC codes, just to continue on that a little bit, they're actually separated into basically 5 different categorizations. So we have NOC A, O, B, C, and D. So if you look at this little chart here, the NOC A, O, and A type jobs are higher skilled type jobs. So you have your executive, your management type roles are NOC O, are NOC code type O. Your professional, more professional type jobs or positions are NOC code type A, and so on and so forth. So you'll find that your technical skill jobs are NOC B, and then intermediate skilled jobs are NOC C, and then your lower skilled labor jobs are NOC D. So this is something that we always have to be aware of as well, because depending on what NOC type your job is, so not only just your NOC code, but the type of NOC code that is, will determine what types of permanent residency options or streams are available to you. So now I'll get into the different immigration pathways, and we'll talk about them all a little bit. We're in Newfoundland, and I imagine most of you who are attending this are in Newfoundland. So I am going to be speaking to the Newfoundland Provincial Nominee Programs, as well as the Atlantic Immigration Program, as well as the federal programs. So the Provincial Nominee Programs, I mean, there are lots of them throughout the country. Every different province has their own different unique programs. Many of them are similar to the ones that are in Newfoundland and vice versa, but they're not all identical. And so, based on what province you have your job offer in, then you'll have to look at the different particular provincial nominee program and look at the different options that are available. So, like I said, I'll only speak to the Newfoundland Provincial Nominee Programs today. But just be aware that there are several across the country, and they're all a little bit unique and different to each other. We'll speak to the Atlantic Immigration Program, because this is, the pilot program was made permanent with some changes very recently, just this month. So that will be an interesting one to speak to a little bit, because I'll talk a little bit about the changes and what that new program looks like. And I'll also speak to federal programs, because federal programs are just that, they're federal. So that means that they're accessible all across the country. So people who are living here in Newfoundland have access to those programs as well. So we'll talk about those a little bit in our presentation today as well. So we'll be starting out with federal programs. All right, so if we go back, the 2 programs I'm going to speak to today are the Federal Express Entry and the Startup Visa. So I'm going to start on Federal Express Entry, and we'll talk about this one a little bit. So Federal Express Entry, the Federal Express Entry program is really, it's an online program, and it's more so an online system. The Federal Express Entry is an online system that basically is an umbrella system for 3 streams underneath of it. So you only have to qualify for one of these 3 different streams in order to be eligible under Express Entry. So I'm going to talk a little bit about all 3 of these different streams a little bit here today. And before I get into the 3 different streams, I'm going to talk a little bit about how Express Entry works, in case some of you don't know. So I like to call this my Cole's Notes version. So the way that the Express Entry works is, as long as you meet the baseline criteria for one of these 3 different streams that I listed in my last slide, then you can submit a profile and enter a profile into the system. And when you enter the profile into the system, and you basically answer a series of questions, we do this for clients all the time, and we actually prepare the profile and submit it on their behalf. And you answer a series of questions, and based on your answers, and the questions are everything about your work experience, education, your work, whether you have family members in Canada, at your age. And then what it does is it gives you a point score. It automatically calculates a point score, and it slots you into one of those three programs. And what it does is every 2 weeks, then the Canadian government, they dip into this pool of candidates, and they issue the people with the highest scores, or select programs. We'll talk about that in a minute. But they'll issue these people, select people, invites for permanent residency. If you receive an invitation to apply, an ITA, then you will have 60 days to submit your documents. Once you submit your documents, then if you're in Canada, you can apply for a bridging open work permit to allow you to continue working if you need to. But you can also, what you also do is you submit your documents and you wait, and the processing time is approximately 6 months to get your permanent residency in Canada for you and your family members. So I say that it's an 8 or 9 month process altogether if you're going to be applying under this program, and if you happen to get an invitation to apply. So there's a couple of things that are a little bit unique about this program. So, in the glory days before COVID, a couple of years ago, then if you had a threshold, if you had a point score of about 370 or above, no matter what program you applied under, then I was recommending that to clients that they submit a profile, because the chances were that you were, most likely going to get an invite to apply. But unfortunately, with COVID and, just recently, what's happened is the Canadian government have decided to narrow the people that they're issuing invitations to. And so you'll see that if you look at the previous rounds of invitations, they have actually been selecting people that are applying under certain programs. So it's and also increasing the threshold for the point score. So just applying under express entry straight up these days doesn't usually, it's at least recently hasn't for most people resulted in an invitation to apply. You have to, maybe go to the province in which you're working and get a nomination, get an extra 600 points to increase your points threshold to get an invite under this program. So I'll talk a little bit about that program, the express entry, not provincial nominee program, a little bit later. But I just want you to be aware that the federal express entry program is changed a little bit in the sense that the Canadian government have changed their strategy in terms of inviting people. And there was a time where if you basically had a score of 370, you could apply under this program and most likely get an invitation to apply. That is no longer the case, and it doesn't seem to be the direction the government is heading in. So if you do have an express entry profile in, and you have maybe only 300 or 400 points, and you're working in Canada, then I do suggest that you apply to the provincial nominee office for an extra 600 points to get you an invite under this program. So in terms of federal express entry and just the different streams that are within that program. So in order to be eligible for this program, you have to meet the criteria for one of these three different streams. And so the first stream I'm going to speak to a little bit about is the Canadian Experience class. So there's this Canadian Experience class, there's a federal skilled workers class, and then there's a federal skilled trades class. So we'll speak to the Canadian Experience class first. So in order to be considered for express entry and be able to put your profile in, one of the things that you'll need to do, actually, regardless of what stream is, you'll have to already have completed an education credential assessment, and you'll have to already have completed your English test. And if you have a spouse, I recommend that they complete both of those things as well, because it will give you extra points under this program. So it's not a bad idea if you think that your spouse, could be helpful in your point score, to have them write an English test and get an education credential assessment done as well. So in terms of the Canadian Experience class, in order to be eligible under this stream, you have to have at least 1 year of work experience in Canada, and it has to be in a high skilled NOC. So one thing to take away from express entry generally as well is that it has to be a high skilled job. Your job offer and your work experience has to be in NOC A, O, or B. So remember I discussed the 5 different NOC categories. Well, NOC A, O, or B, and B are considered high skill. NOC C is intermediate, and NOC D is low skilled. So NOC C and D are not eligible for express entry at all. So you're going to have to look at one of the other programs that we'll discuss in a little bit if you have a job offer in a lower skilled job. So for Canadian Experience class, like I said, it has to be you have to have 1 year experience in Canada, gained legally, paid in NOC A, O, or B. Self-employed work experience does not qualify under Canadian experience class. You have to have NOC CLB 7, a language benchmark of CLB 7 if in NOC A or B, or a CLB 5 in a NOC, or in a NOC B, or CLB 7 in NOC A or O, or A or O. In terms of education, there's actually no specific education requirements, but you do need it to have those, get those extra points. So we do still recommend that you apply and get your education credential assessment. Proof of funds are not required if you're already living and working in Canada. The other thing about this program is that a job offer is actually not required. So this is one of the ones where a job, because it's based on you having previous work experience in Canada. But I will make note that, again, the Canadian government, I think it was last fall that they actually issued invitations to people with under the Canadian experience class category. So it's if you don't have a job offer, but you do have 1 year at least of Canadian work experience, depending on how high your point score is, you may be eligible to receive an invite under this program without having necessarily a job offer right now. But it would really depend on that point score and how well you perform in your other areas to get that point score up high enough to warrant an invite under this category. You also may be waiting a while in the pool because Canadian government, they don't specifically invite people under Canadian experience class very frequently anymore. They've been kind of leaning towards the provincial nominee express entry hybrid applicants. So we'll discuss again that PNP stream in a little bit. So this is not, it's not that it's not possible, it's just that it's not as likely and it's not as much of a sure deal. Okay, so for the federal skilled worker category, this is under express entry. You have to meet kind of a different set of criteria to be eligible under this stream within express entry. And there's a points assessment that has to be done, and you have to have 67 out of 100 points. So it's, again, calculated based on your age, your work experience, all that. So it's important to be mindful that there's actually a separate points grid for this particular stream. You have to have at least 1 year of work experience, again, in a high school position. This does not need to be Canadian work experience. It can be foreign work experience. You have to demonstrate that it was paid. And so one of the things I find a lot with express entry candidates, they may come to me with a refusal sometimes. And it was because they didn't provide enough documentation to demonstrate that they were indeed paid and do indeed have that work experience, whether it's under this stream or the Canadian experience class. You still, need to demonstrate that you have, paid work experience. It wasn't self-employed, and that it was pay stubs. That it was paid, so you had pay stubs and a tax documentation to prove it. One thing I will say, sorry, I just misspoke. So the express entry skilled worker stream, you actually can include self-employed work experience if it was gained in foreign work experience. Under the Canadian experience class, it cannot be self-employed work experience. So you can actually use self-employed for this stream if needed. Language ability is a little bit higher for the stream, CLB 7, and you have to have a minimum of a high school education. But again, you want to include that ECA, and the more education, the higher education you have, the more points you're going to get under this program. Proof of funds. So a job offer is not necessarily required under express entry, a skilled worker stream, but again, you're going to get more points if you have one. And based on the way the Canadian government have been going under this program, you might be stuck with being in the pool and not getting an invite. So if you do have the job offer, then it's better. Proof of funds, again, if you're filing from outside the country and you don't have permanent residency, and you don't have a job offer in Canada, then proof of funds are required. But if you're actually living and working in Canada, which most of you will be, if you're in Canada, then you do not need to demonstrate that you have sufficient proof of funds. So the third stream under express entry is the federal skilled trade stream. This stream is not used very frequently. I've only used it a couple of times, and it's predominantly because it's very specific in the criteria. So you have to have experience, at least 2 years experience in a trade. And it has to be, and so a trade would be like a pipe fitting or a specific regulated trade. So we don't typically, because there's, it's just the pool, the number of people, that would qualify in this program is just so narrow that we just don't use this program a lot. But it is available to any of you that have experience in a trade. So you have to have a valid job offer to be eligible under this program as well. And you have to have at least a CLB 4 and 5 in the different reading, writing, listening, speaking disciplines that as you'll see in our slide. So does anyone have any questions about AW? Are there any questions about the Federal Express entry? Because I'm going to move on now to the startup visa.
There's nothing in the chat, Megan, so I think you're okay to move.
No problem. Okay, so we'll move on to the startup visa. The federal startup visa is a program that was implemented not too long ago. And this program is designed for individuals who are either in Canada or outside of Canada that have a novel business idea that they want to apply, that they want to start up, for a company that they want to start up in Canada. In order to be eligible under this program, you have to be supported by a designated organization, and there's designated organizations all over the country. But the Genesis Center is the designated organization here in Newfoundland. And so this program requires that you have, that you have a majority ownership of the business, that you provide active management from within Canada. So it's not used as maybe, a vehicle for you to get your permanent residency, and you're really going to be managing the business from afar. You have to actually be actively engaged in business management from within Canada. And you must be incorporated in Canada with operations in Canada, or at least that must be the plan. The language benchmark is a little bit lower for this one, CLB 5. And the funds required will depend on family unit size. So for a family of 2, for example, it's approximately $16,000. So it's a little bit higher than it would be under some other programs. So that's something to keep in mind. This program is a really great program. It's received a lot of uptake recently, although the government announced recently that there are some backlogs with this program in terms of processing. I'm sometimes veering if people qualify for other programs, depending on the circumstances, of course, and we may look at other options. But it is a program that I've used a lot for clients. And there's also a work permit option. So if you want to come to Canada or work in Canada while the application for permanent residency is processing, then you can actually apply for a work permit as long as you can demonstrate that, of course, you have the support from the designated organization, but you also have to demonstrate that you're required urgently on the ground in Canada in order to operate the business. Okay, so I'm going to move away from federal programs a little bit, and I'm going to move into the provincial nominee programs. And I'm going to focus again, like I said, on the Newfoundland provincial nominee programs. So as you'll see, there's a lot of them, and I'm going to touch on them all, briefly. I'm not going to go into too much detail, and overwhelm you with information. I'm just going to try to do a little bit of a high level. Really, what this is meant for today is for you to have a general understanding of what's out there and what's available. I don't expect you to memorize all the little tiny intricate details of each program, because there are a lot of them. And you can find a lot of this information online, in terms of the criteria. What you'll find useful today are my tips and tricks, and just the slight nuances between the programs and that kind of thing that you might find you struggle with trying to understand if you go and you read the website, because there's a lot of information on both the IRCC website and the Newfoundland Provincial Nominee website. So today is just meant to be a high-level overview to give you some understanding of what's available and what's out there, without having to dig through all the weeds yourself. Okay, oops, let's go back. So these are the general, the programs under the Newfoundland Provincial Nominee Program are generally split up into 2 different categories. We have applications that are designed for workers, so people that are coming to Canada or in Canada as workers, employees of Canadian businesses. And then there's also 2 programs, really great programs for entrepreneurs. Okay, so before I get into all the different programs, I'm going to speak just very generally about the PNP overall for all the different programs. So yeah, I shouldn't say all the different programs, because generally speaking, you need to have a job offer. There is a program in here where you don't need to have a job offer. So, and obviously the self-employed entrepreneur programs, you don't need a job offer, but generally speaking, you need a job offer for a minimum of 2 years with possibility of extension. You need to have a pay so you want to make sure that, the job being offered is a job that has that meets provincial employment standards. Commission short-term contract and locum positions are generally not eligible for permanent residency under the Provincial Nominee Program. And this is another one, sincere intention to settle in Newfoundland. It's really important that, that you really do have an intention to settle and remain in Newfoundland. Under this program, no matter what category you apply under, the processing time is going to be almost 2 years. And so during that time, you have to maintain this intention to live and settle and remain in Newfoundland. Once you become a permanent resident, things change, people get jobs, they move away. There's nothing going to stop you from doing that. But you really do have to maintain this intention to at least, at the very least, until you get your permanent residency and shortly thereafter. Because if not, then you could be deemed to have misrepresented yourself in the application, because you signed basically a declaration saying that you're going that you maintain an intention to remain in Newfoundland, or to, that Newfoundland is where you want to be. And if you, if you don't really have that intention, you start looking for jobs in other provinces before, or move to another province before your PR is processed, then your application is in jeopardy. So I typically will not recommend, obviously, I would never recommend this program to someone who doesn't really have a genuine intention to stay in Newfoundland. There are other programs available under the federal class. So, this is one of the things that we would discuss in a consult.
So it could be a bit of a challenge to verify sincerity on this one.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you have an obligation as the applicant to, to answer all your questions truthfully and, with sincerity. And so, if you really don't have an intention to remain and stay in Newfoundland, you're technically misrepresenting yourself. And so, I always ask the question, and I always, recommend, if you don't really want to stay in Newfoundland, that you don't apply under this program. But the reality of the situation is that once you get your permanent residence and, life happens and things change, then, no one's, you're not going to lose your PR if you've already, as long as you've maintained that intention. So it is one of those little kind of tricky areas where, you have to be careful yourself and just be knowledgeable. I mean, the thing is that the vast majority of people who are applying on this program, 99% of the time, you have to have a job offer anyway in the province. And so if you have a job offer in the province and, it's a permanent, job offer or minimum of 2 years with possibility of extension, then the idea is that you're going to be in the province anyway, because that's where your job is. You wouldn't be eligible if you didn't. So, that's something to keep in mind as well. So it's just one of those little things that I always mention, that, things happen and change in the future that you can't control and predict, but you have to maintain that intention. Otherwise, technically, it's a misrepresentation, and that's, that can be a serious offense in immigration law. Anyone have any other questions on that? Okay, I'll move on, and we'll just finish up with the Newfoundland section, and then we'll take some more questions. So in terms of just to continue a little bit on the general requirements, you have to have a work permit that's, if you're applying inland, which, this is focused on inland applications. If you're applying inland, you have to have a work permit or a work permit, and you're applying for the work permit, you're already working. You have to have at least 4 months remaining on your work permit to allow sufficient time for them to process the application, give you the support letter, and allow you to apply for an extension. Now, I have had people apply who are on visitor status, and even in some cases study permit status, and that's okay as long as you maintain your status and you're not working, because obviously you're not allowed to work unless you have a work permit, or only work part-time if you're enrolled in full-time studies on a study permit. So something to be mindful of. So you want to make sure you have lots of time. Never leave these things to the last minute. Nothing happens overnight with immigration. Processing times are completely out of our control, your control, everyone's control. So it's better to start these things earlier rather than sit on them. In terms of legal status in country of residence, you have, that's one of the things that PNP will look at. They'll want to see that you have legal status. And, when it comes to refugee claimants and criminal records, if you have a criminal conviction, you're not eligible generally. If it's even if it's an indictable offense or even a summary conviction, you are looking at inadmissibility for any type of application. So that would be something that you certainly want to seek legal advice on and see what options you have available. And then refugee claimants, there are some unique requirements around refugee claimants. Obviously, you can't be a current refugee claimant in order to be eligible. And if you are a failed refugee claimant, you have to leave the country and apply from outside. That's the instructions that we've been given on previous applications. Okay. So in terms of the general process for the Newfoundland Provincial Nominee Program, and now you'll see that some of the processes are different depending on the streamline or the stream that you're applying under. But generally speaking, the process is to apply to the Office of Immigration for a nomination. They've actually been quite quick this year. I'm super happy with the processing times. About a month to 2 months for a nomination out of the province of Newfoundland, whereas last year it was quite a bit longer than that. So yay, we're very happy about that. So once you have your nomination certificate, you can apply for a work permit if you're outside Canada, or a work permit extension if you're inside of Canada. And you can also apply for your permanent residency. When you file your permanent residency, that goes to the federal government. So that's the federal processing. We file them online now, but they go to the federal government. And the processing time on the IRCC website is about 24 months. But I'm seeing them take less than that. I'm seeing them take more like 15 to 18 months, which is great. I don't know if that's going to continue. I think maybe one of the reasons why is because of the AIP. In recent years, there has been less uptake in the PNP programs. I think that's going to change though with the new AIP and the longer processing times for the AIP. And the amount of, I wouldn't say so much work, but the amount of commitment that's required by employers under the new AIP program or under the AIP program, that we may see more uptake. So we don't know where those processing times are going to go, but I'm just speaking to personal experience. I've been seeing them processed in certainly less than 2 years from a federal perspective on the federal side of processing.
Megan, we do have a question.
Yeah.
What if someone has not received a permanent job offer? This person, for example, is in the area of music, and you have trouble keeping the job because of the funding requirements.
Yeah, so it would really depend on the job offer. So you need the minimum requirement under the PNP is that it be at least is that it's a full-time, so minimum 30 hours a week with a minimum 2 year with possibility for extension. So if it kind of fluctuates, like you're here or there, or the funding is only for 6 months and then there might be more funding, the Office of Immigration in the provinces, like in my experience, they're quite responsive, and they're willing to work with employers and workers. So if it's a thing where you really do, you're very confident that you're going to get the funding, you just can't 100% guarantee at the time of submission. It might be something that you speak with the PNP about, because they may be able to work with you on that. As long as they can get something in writing from the employer that explains, the funding and what the history has been, and what the chances are of continuing with funding. So that's something that that could potentially be an option. But if it's something that drops off every 6 months and you're out of work for 2 or 3 months, and then you're waiting for funding again, and then that's not going to work. So it really depends on the circumstance. It has to be continuous, and if the job is lost and the whole application fails, and like I said, it could take easily up to 2 years. To get your permanent residency. So, and you have to maintain employment throughout that entire time, or you're at jeopardy of losing, of the application failing. So that's something to, it's not that it's certainly not possible. It will really depend on the circumstances, and you'd want to speak with the PNP office and see if they'd be willing to work with you on that. And the employer would have to be involved and be able to make certain attestations and that kind of thing. So I think that's hopefully that answers your question. And the other thing too is, depending, I haven't gotten to the AIP yet, but under the AIP, if it's a high school job, you only need a 1 year contract. So the AIP might be a better option in this case if the employer is, very happy to be involved and very supportive. Any more questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay, and there is one in the chat. as well. So if you want to go ahead, and then I'll
Okay. So can somebody take a different route? So instead of like applying for nomination first, can somebody apply directly for a work permit after getting a job offer, and then, after getting that work permit, they can come here and then start working and then apply for nomination at a later date?
So yes and no. So when it comes to apply, it's impossible to just apply. Well, I shouldn't say it's impossible. Okay, so you kind of open up a little bit of a can of worms in terms of, depending on the circumstances. So generally speaking, in order to hire a foreign worker in Canada, the employer has to either obtain an LMIA, a labor market impact assessment, which we haven't really discussed it here today a lot because that's to get a work permit, and we're talking about permanent residency pathways. But if the way to bypass an LMIA, and an LMIA basically is a document that an employer applies to ESDC, to the federal government under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program to say, hey, I've tried to find Canadians first. I haven't been able to find them. Please give me, this LMIA approval to allow me to apply for my worker to apply for a work permit. That's generally the case. So, but there are exceptions to that. One is if you have a nomination from the province under a PMP program, or if you have an endorsement under the AIP. There are also a number of LMIA exempt work permits as well, like intercompany transferees. There's certain international agreements that Canada has with other countries whereby you can bypass an LMIA if you're working in a certain profession or on a certain job. There's also C10, we call C10 and 11 significant benefit work permits that allow people to apply for work permits that are, that would have that where an LMIA is not required because the person's doing such special work that it's going to have a significant positive effect on the Canadian economy and labor market, so that such that an LMIA may not be needed. So there's all kinds of ways where you can actually apply for a work permit, like you said, without having to do the nomination, but you have to meet one of these very specific criteria. It's not just anybody can do that. Like you have to have it depends on what the job is and what type of work permit you're applying for. And yes, if that's the case and you qualify for one of these LMIA exempt work permits and where you don't need an LMIA, and maybe you don't need the nomination either because you are able to get a work permit through one of these other LMIA exempt type work permits, then yes, you can apply directly for the work permit, come start working, and then apply for the nomination or endorsement under the AIP, and then get your permanent residency that way. But what I'm doing is today is to I know that I'm hopefully that was clear, because immigration is very nuanced and it's very complex. And so today, for the purposes of this presentation, I was just focusing on permanent residency pathways and how you would do that if you're already in Canada, either looking for a job or already working. So that's kind of how I focused my presentation today. But hopefully I was still able to answer your questions on that, because it's a little bit outside of what we're discussing today, if that makes sense.
Okay, yes, thank you very much for that. So I just have one last question. So if you do receive that nomination, then do you use that same platform for the NL Provincial Nominee Program to apply for the work permit, or do you use the IRCC account?
Sorry. So all right. So I'm gonna answer it and just hopefully I see and let me know if I answer your question. So when you apply for so if you're here in Canada and you're applying, you're either looking for your first work permit or you're looking to extend your current work permit that you already have, then you would apply to the Office of Immigration for a nomination certificate. With that nomination certificate, then you would do two things. You would file your permanent residency application, which is an online application through IRCC. And then you would also use that nomination certificate to file an online work permit application, either outside Canada if you're outside Canada, or an extension if you're inside Canada already working. And you would file, that application does go to IRCC. As part of that application, there is an online component that your employer has to do called an online offer of employment. They have to pay a $230 fee and fill out this online form. And that all goes to IRCC as part of your work permit application. If you're currently in Canada on a work or study permit and you want to switch to a visitor or a study permit, you want to switch to a work permit. In the past, before the pandemic, you were not able to switch from visitor to work permit. Now you are able. There's a public policy that's allowing you to do that. Unsure, it's extended until next year. Unsure whether they'll keep this as an option or whether it's just during the pandemic. That is an option as well. So you would basically apply for your work permit from inside Canada if you're here already on valid status. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So any other questions, or do you want me to move on? Debbie, are there any other questions in the box?
There are questions. I think one was a quick one, which NOC category is required for skilled worker, and I think that was NOC
Okay.
B. Was it a skilled?
Well,
I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, we haven't quite gotten there yet. So what I'm going to do, so I don't want to, I don't want to, because we don't have a whole lot of time. I still have some more. So I'll kind of gloss over the different criteria, because I haven't gotten into the four different streams. There's skilled worker, international graduate, Newfoundland Express entry, and priority skills. And then there's the entrepreneur programs as well. And then I still have to talk about the AIP as well. We have a half hour. So
I think we'll leave. The other question also is an international graduate, so you might answer some of them.
I might answer them anyway. Okay.
Oh, so we'll keep going.
Yeah, what I'll do is, sure, go ahead, Debbie.
Oh yeah, so we'll keep going, and then we'll circle back to those questions if you haven't answered them.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to speak to the worker section first. So streams underneath the Provincial Nominee Program, whereby you're a worker with a job offer in Canada or looking for a job offer in Canada. So I'll probably answer your skilled worker section question here now. So under the skilled worker stream within the Newfoundland Provincial Nominee Program, there is an age requirement, an age limit. So that's something to be aware of, as you'll see here. And, I can send you a copy of the slide deck if you're interested. I just have to delete the notes because the notes might be old. The slides are updated, but the notes might be old. So CLB4 is required for NOC C and D. The language tests are not typically required for the higher skilled NOCs, as long as the employer is willing to attest that the person has sufficient English for the job. But an English test can be asked at any time. So I always recommend that they have an English test ready in case IRCC asks for it or the Provincial Nominee Office asks for it. The job offer has to be full-time, permanent, or minimum of 2 years with possibility of extension. All different NOC codes qualify under this program, but you have to have job experience. You can't just apply for a PMP nomination under the stream without at least some experience in the job in which you're going to be working. Prevailing industry wage rate. So, you have to be paid at least in accordance with what the wage rate would be for Canadians being paid for similar occupations in Canada. This is a big piece. So unless it's an in-demand occupation, which are listed on the Newfoundland PMP website, there's a bunch of them. They include, nurses and, LPNs, resident care attendants, those types of positions. So there's certain IT sector positions that are exempt, that are in demand. But if it's not an in-demand occupation as designated by the Newfoundland government, then job vacancy assessment is required on behalf of the employer. And the employer has to be willing to go through this. It means that they have to have posted the job on various different websites and go through this process with a labor market development officer to genuinely go through go through an assessment to see whether they've really canvassed the Canadian labor market sufficiently, and there really is a labor market gap. And so the assessments, in my experience, can be done quite quickly. They're quite good and responsive, and we've had them done in as little as a week or two. But it is something that the employer does need to go through if you're applying under this program. If you have a postgraduate work permit, then the idea is that you don't apply under the skilled worker. The idea is that you would apply under the postgraduate work permit stream, which is what I'm going to speak to next. So the international graduate stream, again, you want to have 4 months remaining on your postgraduate work permit. Do not leave it too late. You have to have completed at least a 2-year diploma. In Canada, they've actually removed the Newfoundland piece. So you don't have to have graduated from MUN. You have to have sufficient English and language, or English or French for the job. They don't actually request a formal language test for this application stream, unless it's a NOC C, in which case you have to have completed a CLB, completed an English test. Again, you have to have a job offer similar to the things that we discussed already. It has to be full-time. That means minimum 30 hours a week. Be in compliance with prevailing wage rates. This is an important one for an international graduate. A long time ago, there used to be the case that you had to get a job offer related to your field of study. But what they've done is they've loosened up that requirement. And now it does not need to be related to your field of study, as long as you can demonstrate that it is a career-long type of occupation that you could see yourself doing, for your as your career, and that generally a college or university diploma would be required. So that brings me next to the Newfoundland PMP Express Entry application stream. So remember earlier I spoke to the regular Express Entry stream, the federal program, and I said that the federal government were not really sending invites to people under the just the regular CEC class, the experience class, and that so what they've been doing is they've been limiting or narrowing their invitations to apply in recent months to individuals who have applied to the PNP program in their respective province for the extra 600 points under their Express Entry stream. So Newfoundland has one of these streams. And so if you have a job offer in the province of Newfoundland, which is a requirement, then this would be a good option for you to get your permanent residency, fairly quick. Now, I am finding that people are tending to go through, depending on circumstances, people are tending to go, this is definitely a faster process than the regular PMP streams. It's about the same as the AIP, but it requires less documentation and effort from your employer because it's not an employer-driven program. So I'm finding a lot more uptake in this program because it's, the worker can kind of take the bull by its horns in this program and kind of gather all the documents and kind of drive the process. Whereas under the AIP, the employer is really required, it's like I said, it's an employer-driven program, and so the employer is required to do a little bit more. So it really depends on your relationship with your employer, and obviously, doing an evaluation to see which different streams you qualify for, and see which one's the best for you. So that's something that I would do with people in the consult is go over the different criteria, or take some notes and figure out what your situation is, and go over the different streams that are available to you and kind of come up with a plan and to see which program would be best for you depending on your unique circumstances. So in terms of the Newfoundland PMP Express Entry stream, it's a hybrid stream between the Federal Express Entry program and the Newfoundland PMP program. And so I guess logistically how it works is the first step would be to submit your Express Entry profile. You need to have your language test and ECA completed and done before you can submit a profile. So you submit a profile and have your name entered into the pool. Then what you do is you would immediately submit an application to the Office of Immigration here in the province of Newfoundland. Now you have to have a job offer from a Newfoundland employer in order to be eligible. So you would submit that. The processing time is quite good this year, a couple of months for the Office of Immigration to review and issue you a nomination. What they will do is they will automatically send you an invitation or send you a note or a letter in your Express Entry profile, the federal profile, saying, we've nominated you, we're willing to give you your extra 600 points. Do you accept this nomination? So you actually physically go in there and you accept the nomination. And that will give you an extra 600 points to give you lots of points, such that hopefully within the next week or two, or probably the next round of invitations, you'll get an invitation to apply under the Federal Express Entry program. And then you'll continue on the regular Express Entry, route, okay, because you'll have your 600 points. You'll have an invitation to apply hopefully quite soon. You'll submit your permanent residency application through the Express Entry portal within 60 days. Then, of course, you can apply for a bridging open work permit if you need one or if you're eligible. And then again, of course, your permanent residency is issued approximately 6 months after that. Not every application is processed in 6 months. I think the government have promised to about 80% of applications are processed in 6 months. I've seen a lot of them processed in 6 months. Some of them take longer. So it's not a guarantee, but it is a really good program to get your permanent residency a little bit faster than the regular PMP stream, and maybe with a little bit less employer support than the AIP requires. Okay, so in terms of the Newfoundland PMP Express Entry, the criteria, I'll just go over it really quickly. So there is a point system that you'd have to evaluate to see whether you meet the criteria. So you have to have your job offer, but you also have to meet 67 out of 100 points under the points assessment grid that the Newfoundland PMP has come up with. Obviously, you have to meet either the the federal skilled or the federal skilled worker, Canadian experience class, or federal skilled trades criteria, because you can't have submitted a profile under express entry without having met one of those criteria for one of those programs first. There is an age limit on this one, so you can't be older than the age of 50. Education, you have to have an ECA or Canadian education. So that's right. So just so you're aware, you don't need an ECA if you have a Canadian diploma. You have to have at least 1 year of work experience. You have to have a job offer. You have to have a language of either CLB 5 or 7, depending on the job that you're in, and also depending on the program that you've applied under. So, for example, federal skilled worker requires a CLB 7, but Canadian experience class only requires a CLB 5. So depending on the stream under which you've applied under express entry, that will depend on what the CLB language benchmark is for your particular application. Again, it has to be in a high skill. So all express entry applications you're only eligible if you have a high skill NOC A, or if you're in a high skill NOC A, O, or B. Has to be full time, which is minimum 30 hours a week, and permanent or minimum of 12 months with a Newfoundland employer. And of course, you get extra points for having Newfoundland, have completed school in Canada, having had or have family in Newfoundland, having worked and studied previously in the province as well. Okay, so I'm going to move on. I know that there's questions, but I want to kind of move on quickly out of the PMP streams. So I'll answer some questions at the certainly when we're done, and I'm free to stay beyond if we need to. So we'll discuss that. So I can answer some further questions. Okay, so the Priority Skills Newfoundland is a really great program. This is actually one of the programs under the Provincial Nominee Program here in the province that does not require a job offer. They're currently accepting, I just checked the website this morning, they're actually currently accepting expressions of interest for this program. You'll see so you have to have a minimum of score of 60 in the questionnaire. You can find this on the Newfoundland Government of Newfoundland website. At least 21 years old, you have to have a CLB 5, obviously an intention to live in Newfoundland. And in terms of being eligible, the two kind of main criteria is you either have to have at least 1 year work experience in one of the in-demand occupations that are listed on the government website for this program, or you have to have or be a recent graduate of a PhD or master's degree from MUN or CONA in one of the listed 5 sectors: tech, healthcare, or 4 sectors: tech, healthcare, aquaculture, or agriculture. So I won't go into too much more. Basically, what happens is if you submit an expression of interest and the province of Newfoundland like you and you qualify, then they can issue an invitation to apply, and you can apply for your nomination. And what they'll do is they'll also try to match you up with an employer who are looking for people with your skill set. It's a matchmaking process done by the province of Newfoundland. Okay. So I'm going to go into the entrepreneur program, or I think what I will do is actually, I don't have too much more because I just have the entrepreneur program and then the AIP. So what I'll do is I'll go into the entrepreneur programs, I'll answer those questions, and then I'll do the AIP, and then we'll do some questions. All right. So entrepreneurs, so there's 2 different, under the Newfoundland PMP stream, there's 2 different entrepreneur streams that I'll speak to briefly. I'll talk about generally the general requirements that are required for both programs. So you have to either be purchasing a business or you have to be starting a new business. Either or could work. And so if you're purchasing a new business, there's some specific criteria that are listed here. You have to be actively engaged in the business operation. The business has to be in good standing. It has to have been in continuous operations for 5 years if you're purchasing a business. And if you're starting a business from new, then you have to be establishing that you're going to be creating at least one full-time salaried salaried or paid by the hour employee to a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. So you have to be basically showing that you're going to hire someone, at least one person full-time, as part of your business plan. Business plans are required for these applications, highly recommended, and I can assist with that as well. So entrepreneur. So again, business eligibility, it has to be a for-profit entity. You have to be, engaged, like I said, in managing the business. It can't just be, there's no options for investors, someone who just wants to invest money and get their permanent residency and, not be actively engaged. Those types of applications are long gone. Canadian government have eliminated them, and all of the applications now across all the different provincial nominee offices across the country all require that you have this actively engaged in business and that you're going to be participating in the day-to-day operations. Right, again, so we already discussed, you have to show that you're going to be creating a significant economic benefit for Canada. All this can be done in your business plan. So in terms of ineligible businesses, I've just put them here just so that you're aware that not all businesses qualify, and priority is given to businesses that are in, the tech or marine industry, aquaculture, agriculture. So certain industries are preferred, but you can always make your case. So it's always, everything will be assessed each application will be assessed on a case-by-case basis based on their own merits. But there are some here that's listed that are just, going to be no-goes for the provincial government. Okay, in terms of the actual process. So for the international entrepreneur, so this is if you're applying from outside of Canada and you're looking to move to Canada as an entrepreneur to Newfoundland, then the way that the process works is you submit an expression of interest. If the province likes you, they issue an invitation to apply. Once you apply, you submit your application forms, a business plan. Immigration will review it. There's also a net worth verification process where you have to verify your net worth by a designated net worth provider or a designator. There are a number of different official, reputable accounting firms that would do this, that are approved by the Newfoundland government to do this. You would go for your business interview and sign a performance agreement, and then, provided all goes well, the immigration office will issue you a work permit support letter. You would use that to apply for a work permit for you and your family. Come over and work. You would have work for a year and establish your business. And then you can, once you've been here and working and established the business for a year, you can make a request for a nomination. Once the Office of Immigration will evaluate to see that you kept up to your end of the bargain. And you will then apply for permanent residency using that nomination. And the permanent residency, the federal portion of the permanent residency application process is about 2 years. But again, like I said, I've been seeing them process in less. So this is a little bit, it's a longer path to permanent residency. You're looking at 3.5 years, usually by the time everything is said and done, from the start of your expression of interest to the day you become a permanent resident. But you can come before that, in the interim to work, right, and on a work permit. So that process usually is only, anywhere from 6 months to a year, depending on timing. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about the International Entrepreneur Program. So this is, continue to talk about the International Entrepreneur Program. Again, there's an age limit, 59 years old on this one. You have to have at least 1 year work experience, either as a business owner or managing a business. You have to own at least 1/3 of the business. Again, the CLB-5 is there. So you have to have reasonable language. The CLB-5 isn't that, that's intermediate level English. That's not, a really high threshold to meet, but it's more than basic. It's, conversational. And then you, of course, again, like I mentioned before, have to have ongoing participation in the day-to-day operation. So you can't just be an investor. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the International Graduate Entrepreneur Process. So this is for people who are recent graduates and who have recent graduates of a Canadian university and have a postgraduate work permit. So this process works similar in that you submit an expression of interest, you receive an invitation to apply. Then there's an interview and nomination process. Once you're nominated, you can use that to apply for an extension of your work permit if you need. But the idea is that you're already in Canada living and working because you're on that postgraduate work permit. And again, you apply for permanent residency once you get that nomination. And again, the processing time for the federal portion is, again, 2 years. But again, like I said, I've been seeing them process in a little bit less than that, at least right now. But again, because of the whole process, you have to start the expression of interest, submit your application, do your interview, get your nomination. The whole process is, from the start of the process to the time you get your permanent residency, you're looking at anywhere from 2 to 2.5 years. In terms of criteria for the international graduate entrepreneur, you have to be minimum 21 years old. The CLB 7, so the language requirement is higher. I guess the idea is that you're, that you're an international graduate, and so your English would be better. You have to have a postgraduate work permit that's valid. You have to have graduated from with at least from a university, Newfoundland University or college, with a minimum of 2 years full-time study, and of course you have to have at least 1/3 ownership in the business. Again, actively engaged in the business. You can't just be an investor. And again, an intention to settle permanently and live and reside in Newfoundland. Okay. So now I'm going to go on to the Atlantic Immigration Pilot Program and speak to this a little bit. So the program was originally launched in 2017. It was very successful. But there were some tweaks that needed to be made when the program was made permanent in January of 2022 is when they started accepting designations in most provinces. But the federal portion was I guess reopened in March just this year, 2022. So in terms of the Atlantic Immigration Program, the pilot is removed because it's no longer a pilot. It's an employer-driven process. So there's more work required on behalf of the employer. So if you have an employer who's really keen, who is familiar with this program and the process, then it is a good option for you. And the processing time is a bit faster than the regular Newfoundland PMP streams or regular streams, because the federal processing of the PMP streams are closer to 2 years. Like I said, a little bit less than that, but 2 years is what they're saying online. And whereas here at the Atlantic program, the processing time for the federal portion was 6 months, but they've changed that. At least that's what we've been told, that the processing time is going to be closer to 12 months going forward. I couldn't find anything on the IRCC website that actually confirmed this, so that's still yet to be determined. It's still a brand new program, so just take that information with a little bit of a grain of salt, because I'm just not quite sure what the processing time is going to be, but I suspect it's going to be longer than 6 months. So employer designation is the first step. Then, and there's some training that the employer has to do for both the designation process and for the endorsement process. So the designation is required first. Then the foreign worker, whether in Canada or not, has to do a settlement plan, which is basically just, and the ANC actually facilitates these. They can speak more to this, but it's a plan that they work with you on. To basically help you establish yourself in Newfoundland and give you the supports that you need. Make sure that you have the supports you need. Then with that, you can submit an endorsement application, and the employer typically will submit the endorsement application. A certificate of endorsement will be issued, and then similar to the Provincial Nominee Programs, you can actually then submit a work permit application and then also your permanent residency application. You have to submit your permanent residency application within 90 days of submitting your work permit application. And the processing time, like I said, it used to be 6 months, but it's now going to be closer to 12 months. So in terms of employer eligibility under the AIP, they have to be hiring full-time, non-seasonal candidates or employees. The business has to be, operational and in good standing for at least 2 years. And they have to be really engaged and willing and committed to meeting the settlement needs of the applicant and their accompanying family members. In terms of the eligibility criteria, before in the pilot program, they actually had 3 different streams. They've changed things a little bit this time around to try to, I guess, in an attempt to make it a little bit more streamlined. But you have to have a full-time job offer. So this is a job offer required because it's an employer-driven process. A job offer is required. It can be in any NOC except for NOC D. If it's a NOC C, it has to be permanent. If it's NOC A or B, you only need a 1 year minimum. Experience, you have to have worked at least the equivalent of 1 year in the previous 5 years. In the pilot program, it had to be 1 year within 3. So they've expanded that criteria. No work experience is required if you're an international graduate. If you are, so under this program, the education required will be based on the NOC type of the job being offered to you, but it's only high school for B and C, and 1 year post-secondary for NOC O or A. Again, for the AIP, both the education and credential assessment and the language test are required for this program. So there's no way around it. Whereas under some of the PNP streams, it's not required. So that's something to keep in mind. The language, right. So in terms of the language, the CLB Canadian language benchmark required. Again, it's dependent on the NOC code the NOC code of the job being offered and the type. NOC A, O, and B require CLB 5 and C CLB 4. There is a proof of funds requirement if you're filing from outside of Canada, or if you're not working in Canada at the time of filing. But if you are working and living in Canada on valid status, then there is a no funds requirement. The funds requirement is not nearly as high as it is for the startup visa. I think it's somewhere closer to 6,000 for 2 people, but I don't quote me on that. I have to look it up. The information is available on the IRCC website. So it's much lower though for applicants than it is for some of the other federal programs. Key takeaways for the AIP is that international graduates don't need any work experience. For the high skilled, for NOCs A and O, you don't need a permanent job. It just needs to be for 1 year. The beauty of this program is there's no age restrictions. I've had to use this program quite a bit for some of my clients that are older than the age of 59 or 50 in some cases. The language requirement is lower than in some of the self-employed or entrepreneur programs. CLB 4 and 5 is quite low. There is a work permit option available. It's a self-employed work experience is not eligible under this program. And not available to NOC D positions. And also, there's enhanced settlement and retention criteria or, components to this. But again, that's accompanied as well by higher, wouldn't so much say burden, but, more involvement from the employer side. And so that's not desirable for some people and some applicants. Okay, so this is my last slide, actually. So I might just go into the tips and tricks, and then I'll answer questions. Okay, so tips and tricks. Some of these things that I've already discussed a little bit, but complete tests and clearances in advance. You certainly will want to do that. Police clearances and language tests and education credential assessments are all important. Know your NOC code. So make sure that before you file any type of application that you really kind of go on the IRCC website and look up your NOC code, try to find which one is best for you. If you find that there's 2 or 3 or 4 that's applicable, go with the one that is most suitable for you, that really mimics yours the most. More work experience documentation is important. So this is when you're filing any of these applications, particularly the express entry and the AIP, you really want to hone in on work experience, paid work experience. So typically just a letter of explanation, a letter of confirmation of employment from a previous employer is typically not enough. You want to show that you were paid through pay stubs or bank statements that show that you're getting routine payment, pay slips, tax documentation, all kinds of stuff. More is better in this type of situation. You really want to provide lots of documentation to that effect. Sweat the details. So, I'm very detail oriented, and you have to be as an immigration lawyer. You have to, look at every little tiny intricate detail, how letters are constructed, to make sure that they meet criteria. There's especially in the federal programs where you don't have an immigration officer that you can actually speak to, like you can maybe under the provincial programs. On those federal programs particularly, it's really important to pay attention to detail and make sure that your documentation demonstrates that you meet all the criteria, because there's little margin for error. There are very limited options for self-employed applicants. They're available, but they're limited. And so it's something to be aware of as well. Consistency in applications is critical. So I have, when you're filing these applications on your own, whether it's a study permit, or a visitor visa, the first time you apply, it's really important that you're consistent later on with those applications. And if there's an issue or a discrepancy, that you explain it. So I can't tell you how many times I've had international students come to me and we filed spousal sponsorship applications for them where they didn't disclose a common law spouse in their study permit application, and they get caught up on that because they aren't aware of what common law definition is when they originally filed that study permit application, and then they get tripped up on it later on. So things like that are really important, understanding and knowing what the what the laws are, and then if you made a mistake and there is an inconsistency, be truthful, disclose, and explain your way around it. It's usually okay unless it was a gross misrepresentation. Always be better and easier to include all dependent family members now instead of applying for them later, because it's a separate application. Don't ever let your status lapse. Give yourself lots and lots and lots of time. Medicals are only valid for a year. And so I typically will, there are exceptions to this, but typically I request that you don't do your medical until you're asked, or unless it's part of the application, because when you get your permanent residency, the duration of your landing, like you'll have a certain number of months to land, usually around 6 months. But depending on when your medical expires, you may need to do another medical, or they may shorten the landing period. So depending on the circumstance. So, it's always better to just make sure that you wait till the last minute to do your medical. If you're filing under the AIP, ensure that you have genuine employer support. If they are hesitant at all, you're better off filing under one of the other programs if you qualify, because there is, you don't want to be left waiting on your employer for, filing things and doing things. You're better off just taking into your own hands and filing the application yourself under one of the other streams. Okay, so I'm sure there's questions. So let's go ahead. I know that we're a little bit over, but hopefully that's okay.
That's okay by me. I'm going to read first the chat questions, and then if there is someone that would prefer to unmute and ask directly, we'll go to that. But I'll start with the chat. And we have, I think you answered part of this one already. I'm an international graduate and have a PGWP. I'm currently in Newfoundland and starting working a permanent job next week. The company is not designated AIP, so I'd like to go with PNP. I'm also married. She's in the process of a work permit. We are thinking she might get it within 3 weeks. After she arrives to Newfoundland, I'd like to apply for both of us. Can I also apply for a PR for her if she does not have a job?
Yeah,
second,
so absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. And then second is, how can we prove that there's an intention of a 2-year job offer?
Right. So there's a couple components to that. So yeah, if your employer is not designated and they don't seem really interested in it, then and you're an international graduate, then yes, then the international graduate regular Newfoundland PMP stream is likely the best option for you, unless you have 1 year work experience in a high skilled job before you came to Canada, in which case maybe you could look at the express entry federal skilled worker and then applying to the PMP under the express entry stream to get you 600 points. That would be a faster option, but you'd have to have that 1 year work experience. So if you don't, and you're an international graduate, then the international graduate stream, PMP, is best for you. Absolutely, your spouse does not need to have a job offer to be eligible with you. Any accompanying family members, any dependent family members, which would include a spouse, and any dependent children aged 21 years of age and under, can be included in your application. Your spouse does not need a job as long as you have one. In terms of being eligible, your employer is going to need to demonstrate either via a job offer letter or employer confirmation letter that you have a full-time, which is minimum 30 hours a week, job offer with of at least 2 years with possibility for extension. So usually when you're offered a job offer, I shouldn't say usually, but often, when you're issued your offer letter or your job offer letter and you sign it, usually will indicate that it's, full-time, permanent, or indefinite. So that would be preferable. But if it's not, then you have to indicate that it's at least for 2 years with possibility for extension.
All right. So for NLPNP with the jobs NOCC, do the jobs, so not code C, do the jobs have to be in-demand jobs?
So under the regular Newfoundland PNP skilled worker stream, or I guess internet or a graduate, international graduate, if it's a NOC job, it doesn't need to be in demand. No, it does not need to be in demand. However, what your employer will have to do is, if you're on a postgraduate work permit, your employer will not need to complete a job vacancy assessment. But if you are, looking for a work permit as well, and you're not already on a work permit in Canada, working for that employer, then your employer will need to complete what's called a job vacancy assessment, which will have to show that they've demonstrated that they've tried to find Canadians first for the role, unless it's in demand, in which case they won't have to do the job vacancy assessment.
All right. Can I apply for NLPNP Express Entry with a PGWP?
So you can, but you have to have 1 year work experience, because in order for you to be either foreign or in Canada, so in high skilled job, so in order for you to be eligible under Express Entry, you have to meet the criteria for either Canadian Experience Class, Federal Skilled Worker, or Federal Skilled Trade. And the Canadian Experience Class requires you have 1 year work experience in Canada, and the the Canadian Experience Class requires that you have 1 year work experience in Canada, and the Federal Skilled Worker requires that you have 1 year work experience anywhere. So if you are on a postgraduate work permit and you're a recent graduate and you don't have that work experience yet, then you're not eligible under Express Entry. So you would have to work first for a year. So I've had lots of clients who are really interested in applying under the Express Entry stream. And so they work first for a year, they get their job, they get their postgraduate work permit and work first for a year, and then apply under Express Entry. But to be honest, that's probably not the best option for you at this point in time, if you're because you can just file an application under the international graduate stream, under the regular Newfoundland PNP stream, and apply under that category. It's kind of, either or are about the same length of processing time, but maybe I would say the provincial nominee a little bit faster, just based on what I've seen recently, because I've seen them process in less than 2 years. Because if you have to wait for that 1 year work experience first and then apply, then you're looking at, close to 2 years total, right, to get your PR, because you've got to work first for the year and then you've got to wait for your PR, file and wait for it. So, they're kind of, one the same. But, in my experience, PNP is probably a little bit faster.
Okay. Does a JVA also is a JVA also needed for the NLPNP applicants who have been working for the current employer for a year? How about LMIA?
Yeah, so it's typically not. So if you're already working for the employer, and you're on either a postgraduate work permit or LMIA supported work permit or any other type of LMIA exempt work permit, then typically the JVA is not required. Or if it's an in-demand occupation.
Okay. And then the last question that I have in the chat is, if I am a graduate student, but I stay here 16 months, now I need 1 year work experience, and under PNP graduate stream, the job offer does not need to be related to my study or my experience.
So I'm not sure I quite understand. Can you say that again? Just can you read it again, Debbie?
Yep. It's if I am a graduate student, but I am staying, I guess I've stayed here for 16 months. Now I need 1 year work experience, or under the PNP graduate stream, the job offer does not need to be related to my study.
Right. So I think, or your experience. Yeah. So I think what they're saying is that so you're on a postgraduate work permit, recent graduate, you do not need 1 year work experience unless you're applying under Express Entry. So that's why I'm saying you're better off applying under the international graduate stream under the Newfoundland PNP. That way you don't need 1 year work experience first. You can apply right away, and the job being offered to you does not need to be related to your field of study, as long as it's a career type role that normally would require some college or university. So in your case, you don't need to prove the 1-year work experience. And you also don't need to show that you've been resided in the country for 16 months unless you're applying under the AIP. But in your case, if you're applying under the PNP, you just need to demonstrate that you have that you have your university degree. So I think I've answered your question. Sometimes it's kind of hard to give exact advice unless you have all the little intricate details. So I'm doing my best. So anything I say, I'm making assumptions. Just be aware. And if you want to be 100% certain, you can book a consult with me, and I'll go over with you.
Perfect. And sorry, the last one in the chat is, so I'm just going to paraphrase a little bit of this one. So if it's a franchise, so a franchisee employee, so of a franchise, and that franchise is not designated, not an AIP designated employer in Newfoundland, but they are in other areas. So this particular franchise has not been designated, but it has in other regions. And there are lots of international students working there, and there are no supports in this because it isn't an AIP employer. Should you wait to see if the employer is going to be designated or go with another employer or another stream?
Yeah, I think you don't need to necessarily go with another employer. You could go with another stream, but it would depend on your circumstances. I'd want to, it's a situation where I'd like to meet with you and kind of determine what options are available, because it depends on what occupation you're in. Like if you're in foods, you're one of the counter attendants, your options are going to be more limited because it's a low skilled job. But if you're a supervisor or manager, there will be more options available to you. So that's where kind of the nuances and the details are really important for determining what options are available. I don't know what kind of employer you have and what kind of relationship you have, but if the employer doesn't seem willing and isn't really interested in getting designated, I wouldn't sit around and wait for it. The EIP is really meant for employers who are really engaged and willing to do this. I mean, I represent lots of employers who are designated across Atlantic Canada, and some of them have retained me to do the applications for clients. You know what I mean, for their workers, because the what's involved is again, I don't want to say laborious, but it's employer-driven programs. So there's things that are required that the employer has to do, and so if it's an employer who just doesn't seem really keen to do that, then I don't recommend going that route. You don't need to. It just means you're going to get your PR maybe 6 months, max a year later. But then you're not sitting around waiting and relying on your employer for something that may never happen. So you want to look at your other options for sure. But yeah, I mean, you can go with a different employer if they're designated and they're willing and you have that opportunity, then that could work. Or you can look at another stream. The regular PNP stream, before this new program, with the Atlantic Immigration Pilot Program, there were a lot of, there was a lot of buzz around it, and the processing times for federal permanent residency was quite quick, 6 months. It's looking like it's not going to be as fast anymore. And if that's the case, then it's not as desirable of a program as it was, because the processing times federally aren't as fast. And so the PNP streams, because of the less work involved, are looking more desirable. So the processing times are going to be more comparable. I think it's still going to be longer, but not by a lot, maybe by 6 months. They're saying by an extra year, but in my experience, like I said, the PNPs are not taking full 2 years. They're taking like 15 months. So that's a difference of 5 months. So for the extra bit of work that's involved, it's just everyone's situation is going to be unique and different, and so you just have to take that into consideration.
Thank you so much, Megan. I think we have one question with Noran has a hand up. Noran, if you want to go ahead.
Hi, are you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
My question is about ARD, because I am a graduate student, but I almost finished this semester, but I didn't be here for 16 months. I be here only for 8 months. So the 8 months I take it online from my home country. So my question is if I am eligible for ARD under graduate student or not.
So I'm really sorry, Norn. I couldn't really understand what you're saying. There's a lot of background noise.
Yeah, there is some background noise. Maybe if you could just move in somewhere a little quietly, we could hear you at the beginning and then it's quite loud.
You didn't hear me?
Yeah,
we're just hearing something in the background, like
my question is, I'm a graduate student, but I didn't stay here for 16 months because I take 8 months online from my home country. So now I am eligible for AID undergraduate student.
Okay, yeah. It's funny actually. I had the same question yesterday in another one I did. So what she's asking is, because of COVID, you performed or you completed a portion of your schooling. You've completed a portion of your schooling in your home country. And so you don't technically meet the requirements under the AIP if you're an international graduate to have the 16 months completed school within Canada out of 24 months. So under the AIP, if you're applying as an international graduate, then you actually have to have physically resided in one of the Atlantic Canadian provinces for 16 out of the 24 months preceding the date of application. And so what she's saying is that she technically doesn't meet that because of COVID, and they were allowing people to finish their studies online or complete a portion of their studies online through their home countries. So, Norn, that's a really good question, and I don't have the answer to that. I think the best thing to do would be to write an email to the Office of Immigration here in Newfoundland and ask them, because, and that's what I'm going to do as well, because it's unclear. They haven't released any information on that, on whether they would be allowing that, to be acceptable, whether they would allow people to apply and make an exception in those circumstances. I do know that international students generally are being treated, some of their schooling is being treated as schooling inside Canada for the purposes of obtaining a postgraduate work permit. So we know that the federal government are making exceptions for that situation. It's very unclear whether they will make the exception for under the AIP. So that's something that we would I'd want to look into before we file an application. And I suspect, they're quite good at the Office of Immigration. I've gotten, good answers from them in reasonable timeframes. So if you wrote them that question, I think that they'd be able to answer it for you.
All right. And then I think we have one more hand up. Trang. I'm not sure if that hand was left up, or go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, I have a question. I graduated from an animation course in Newfoundland, but since I graduated, I couldn't find any job in my field. So now I have to work in a grocery store, and I know that the job in a grocery store is a retail sales clerk. It's just the job knock C. So I'm wondering, is that job have any chance to apply for a PNP International Graduate Program by any chance?
Yeah, so immigration they'll assess each application on a case-by-case basis. It's unlikely because is it a knock C or a knock D, Trang?
I think it's knock C because I work in a grocery store as a retail sales, so I guess it's knock C. Yeah,
I'd have to look that up. So if it's a knock C, it has more chance than a knock D. But what I would do is I'd look up the knock code, find the knock code, and look up the requirements for that job. And when you look up the knock code on the government website, there'll be an indication that says like education requirements. And the education requirements indicate like some college or university required, then you're most likely okay. If not, then it might be a hard sell to the Office of Immigration here that that this is a career-long type of role for you that you see yourself doing for the remainder of your career or your working life. And so it may not fly. If it's a knock D, then it's even less likely to. So it's something that you have to you have to take into consideration. You could always apply, and you might end up with a refusal. What I would say is that I'm sorry, I'm just getting a notice. Just one second. Okay. So you'd have to take that into consideration. It's possible that they may allow it, but they require that the employer do a job vacancy assessment if it's not an in-demand occupation. And so they may require that you file under the federal skilled worker category instead after you've gotten a couple of years of work experience or a year of work experience. It's one of those situations where it's not a clear-cut case, and there are definitely some risks involved. So it's not a guarantee, but it's also not completely, hope isn't all completely lost, especially if you have an employer who's willing and able to demonstrate that they have trouble finding Canadians and permanent residents to do this job. So in about 5 minutes, but we can keep going.
Sorry, it's going to be a quick question. So how much money does one individual have to have in their bank account to be able to apply for the PNP?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So all the different programs all have varying requirements. Okay, when it comes to funds, generally speaking, if you're already living and working in Canada on a work permit, you do not need to demonstrate funds. However, the PNP office here in Newfoundland, I have seen them ask for funds even when you are working, just so that they can see and are happy and satisfied that you can afford. That you aren't in lots of debt, and that you have the means to be able to support yourself. So in terms of the exact monetary amount under the PNP stream, they haven't disclosed that, and it's listed nowhere that I could find on their website. But I have had clients that have had a couple of $1,000 savings and haven't had any issues. But I mean, if you have a large family and you're coming over from Canada, you haven't been here yet, and you have to buy flights for everyone, and that's different. So it looks to me like they evaluate it on a case by case basis, and use some reasonableness and at their discretion. So it really will depend on your circumstances, but it will be less certainly for a smaller family unit size, and also certainly less if you're already living and working in Canada.
Thank you.
Oh, you're muted, Debbie.
Sorry, I didn't realize I did that. Thank you so much for giving us the extra time and for all of your work today with this presentation. We are so grateful to have you and to have the support of McInnes Cooper. We will, I guess, be waiting expectantly for the session number 3, the third and final in this series. And until then, everybody stay tuned, because we are so happy to have Meghan with us for this series.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Excellent. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.